In today's video, I'm going to cover how I take care of my SawStop PCS. Now, this is really only applicable to the two PCS models. I don't know if the ICS, industrial cabinet saw, is the same, and I don't know about the contractor or job site either. You're going to have to refer to your own manuals for that. This is everything I do to maintain my saw. Some of this is done yearly, some of it's done once a month or so. Now, you may not need to do all of this at once, but I wanted to condense this in one video because SawStop has a lot of videos and a lot of information online, but it's kind of all over the place and you've got to find all of it in different spots. So in case you haven't done any maintenance in a while, you can just follow this all the way through and you'll be good for a while. I have in front of me here everything that I use to do this. From left to right, we've got paste wax, dial indicators, some kind of flashlight or headlamp. Marine wheel bearing grease is what I was recommended by SawStop to use on the gears of the saw for raising and lowering. If you want to set the depth stops or any of the angle stops, you're going to need some relatively small-ish wrenches. It's tight in there. A trusted square is going to help. An angle gauge, again, if you want to set the stops. Some brushes to help get the grease out. It's really nasty in there. A pick I find very helpful to reach into spots to get some of the sawdust grease out of there. Definitely some paper towels. I find, mineral spirits to be very helpful getting grease off of the brushes so that then you can go clean more out of there. Some 3-in-1 oil. And then I like to go through and check all of the bolts, so some metric sockets are going to help as well. And while you're there, also grab the wrenches that came with the SawStop as well. At the very end, we'll make sure the blade, the cartridge is close enough to the blade, and I think we need 1 or 2 of these at a few points. Now, the order I'm doing this in is how I do it. I will leave timestamps below. If you don't need to do all of it, you don't have to do all of it in this order, but this is what I find easiest. My final piece of advice is if you have a bad back or any sort of bad body area, limber up because we got to get down and in there. It is tight and we are at odd angles, so just do a few stretches and be ready to go. Now, the first thing we can do is we're going to just take this fence and we're going to put it somewhere else. We don't need to have it on this table so that we can knock our head on it. After we remove this, we're going to want to vacuum as well as possible inside of the cabinet. At times, we're going to be right up in there and we don't want to have to wear a mask because we have dust everywhere. So go through, take this off, and do a real nice, good, thorough vacuuming just so we are all good to go and we stick our head in there. We're not coughing away. We don't have to wear a hot mask, sweaty. Now, before we get in here, we're going to make sure the saw is off. We're going to make sure it is fully unplugged from the wall. I really like having a headlamp, but some kind of flashlight is going to help as well. I find it's easiest to get in there and vacuum when you tilt the blade away, so I always start that way. You could try reaching around in there, but we're going to have to tilt it anyways for doing the grease. So go ahead and just tilt it to 30-ish so degrees right now. Up next, we're going to do the grease. So we're just going to go ahead and take off this side door and the back panel as well while we're down here. We'll need to get through the side later to do the angles. So while we're already down here, we'll just take both of them off. You're going to need an Allen wrench to take off this back one. Don't lose these. All right, the first thing we're going to do are the 2 twist wheels, the raising and lowering and angling wheel on the inside here. So we're going to take the 3-in-1 oil and at least a paper towel, and we're going to come around and go down through the side. Now, where we are ending up is going to be right here on this guy. So we're going to start out coming from the outside, and at about 30 degrees straight ahead, you can see it pretty easily. You can bring it closer to you if you need to. We're going to clean this area around the side here, and then we're going to drop some wicking oil right around this area. Now, the second one is positioned down and over here. So we are going to go back to 90 degrees so that we can reach through the top. We are going to now come down, in, and through, and we are going way back to this guy right here. We're going to clean that off and apply the wicking oil to it as well. You can come from the side if you want. You can come from the top, however you want to do it. Once you have placed the wicking oil in both, go ahead and raise and lower the blade a few times and go ahead and go back and forth from 0 to 45 a few times just to spread it around, get it in there. Now, these next 3 are where we have to get a little limber here. I like starting from the top here, and I will bring you in. And we're going to do the 2 slots that the trunnion moves through when we change the angle. I just find they're easier to access through the top here. We're going to clean these out. This is where the pick really comes in handy. And once we've cleaned those out, we will then apply the wheel bearing grease to them. Starting from the front, we are going to come in here. We are going to clean this out. You can see this slot right there. This one right here. And then we are going to transition around and do the same one on the opposite side, this guy right here. Now you will need to move the trunnion and the angles as you go to get around in there, but you're just going to clean all of it out and get it nice and clean before we reapply grease to them. Now these go way up and in there, so make sure you follow it all the way up there. You can see a lot of the old grease mixed with sawdust. Once you think you've gotten most of it out, go ahead, tilt the blade a little this way, clean behind on the other side. We're going to go all the way over with the blade to 45. We are now going to enter through here and do the other side of that back there. And then we will come around and do the other side right there. Again, we're entering and looking into the right. And then entering and looking in to the left. This is where a pick can really come in handy because we are going down in there and getting this out right in this area. And if we're going to do this, we want to do it correctly so that we don't have to do it again for another year or so. Again, make sure we're doing both sides, coming in here and just picking this out. There's so much junk in there. We're now going to come in with our marine wheel bearing grease before we tilt this back, and we're going to apply it, I'll say liberally. We will end up cleaning up any spillover straight into those slots. Just take a glob on your finger, rub it all the way in. We'll do this side, and then we will tilt it all the way back to 90 degrees. Do the other side, and then we will tilt the saw back and forth a few times. Once we've done that, we will wipe off any excess that's kind of come out and over. Again, we're coming in through the front here and coming straight down to the back. We then come around to the back, and we walk right in through here up to this guy. And like I said, we will clean off any excess once we have tilted this back and forth a few times, because there will be some spillover. We will now tilt this 90 degrees and do the other part of those two slots. All right, coming in through the front and going straight back to this guy right here. Now go ahead and go back and forth between 90 degrees and 45 degrees, maybe 4 or 5 times. Just keep going. And then when you're done with that, we'll go back in there, and any grease that's kind of come out to the side, anything that's just kind of globbed up, we'll just kind of remove some of that. It doesn't have to be a ton of it in there. We're just making sure the whole thing is coated before we take any out. That was the easy one. So now we're going to come around the back, and we are going to go down and deal with the raising and lowering mechanism of the blade. This is where it gets a little tricky. Okay, we are going to come down and around the back, and we took off this panel earlier, and we have the first of our gears right here. Now this will rotate around by changing the height of the blade. So you're going to go through and just clear out all of this grease and dust. And in order to get the gear to rotate, go height up or height down, depending upon where you're starting, and it will change so you can go through and get all of that out of there. This is where the pick and the wire brush really come in handy. I'm going to raise and lower the blade so that you can see how these gears move. All right, I like to bring down my grease, paper towels, brushes, and picks so I don't have to keep going back and forth other than to raise and lower the blade. Clean everything that you can reach and then raise the blade and give it a good few cranks, because it's actually only a little bit turns at a time. So you can give it quite a few cranks when you're over there so you don't have to go back and forth a million times. We're just going to get all this out of there, get it nice and clean, and then reapply grease to it. Now, if you're using something like a brush or a toothbrush, I've noticed that when it gets super gummed up, a little mineral spirits on a paper towel can help pull it off. I do not spray mineral spirits onto the gears or anything. It's just to get it out of the brush, because the brush will clog up quite a bit. All right, once you've got this all cleaned out, we're going to apply a liberal amount of grease. We will raise and lower the blade. You will come back after, let's say, 4 cranks, apply a little more, crank it again, and go all the way around until you've got grease in every slot. At which point then crank it up and down 4 or 5 times, come back, wipe off any excess grease. Up next, we are going to tilt the blade to 30 degrees. We are then going to raise or lower the blade, whichever direction, to about halfway. and it will expose this set of gears right here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to clean it, apply new grease, wipe away excess. Sometimes the side of this is hard to reach. You can come in from the side where the motor is and have a little go on that side if you need to. But same process here. As you clean some off, you'll need to raise the blade, lower the blade to access other areas. But it's easiest to see it all to begin with, starting exactly halfway up so you get an idea of what you're looking at. All right, this is what it looks like after I've reapplied grease, cleaned it all up. I've got some in every little notch there, up and down 4 or 5 times to spread it. Check again whether there's any more that needs cleaning up. We just don't want globs hanging all over the place. It'll collect sawdust. So that's how I like to fill all of the gears, just inside, none spilling out all over the place. All right, we have one left. We're going to come in from the side and go down, turn in, and we are looking at this guy right here, the worm drive. We're going to clear all of these gears out, this little guy out, clean all of this up in here, and rotate it. I'm at 45 right now to expose all of this. Rotate it as you go. It will come out this side and you can clear some more. Clean it all out, re-grease it, clean up the excess grease after 4 to 5 turns. At this point, it should look roughly like this, clean but with grease inside of the, I don't know what you call that, the gears, I guess we'll go with. At this point, we can go ahead and close this door. We can go ahead and put this back cover onto here. If you are planning to use the saw now before doing anything else, put this one on as well, but we will use that to access the stop so you don't have to put it back on if you're doing this all at once. Congratulations, the hardest, most kind of labor-intensive part, in my opinion, is over. We're now going to do a bunch of kind of tuning and setup things related to cutting. Miter slots parallel to blade, parallel to fence, etc., etc. If all you needed to do was grease it, you're done there. I would suggest cleaning the top and re-waxing just in case any grease got on it. For the rest of you, we will do that at the end after we've done everything else. We will then clean and wax it. Now with this tuning, we first need to get the miter slots parallel to the blade. To do this, you're going to need a, I believe this is 17 millimeter, the number 5 Allen key and the included Allen keys, either a dial indicator or a 12-inch combo square. A 6-inch does not quite fit, so that's a little too short. A Sharpie, ideally a headlamp, it's really tight under there, and either a mallet or your hip, or we can sort of kind of adjust it with this as well. Basically what we need to do is get a baseline reading here of how far out of square we are. Then we can adjust from there. And like I said, you can either use your hip or a mallet or the Allen wrench to adjust, but we're really just working in very tiny little adjustments here unless this is way out for you. Now, if you are just setting this up, do this before you put the wings on there, okay? If you also are the kind of person that has a bunch of time or you have some help, this is a lot easier if you remove the wings, the table, the rails, all of it. It's a lot harder and tighter under there to get in there with this Allen key without that. The first thing we're going to do though is get a baseline reading of how far off we are. To do this, we're going to put a saw blade back in there. Again, make sure everything is unplugged and off, and either grab your dial indicator or your 12-inch combo square, as well as a Sharpie. Now, we're essentially looking for the deviation of how tilted this table is relative to the blade, and we use the miter slots to do that to get a reference point. All you need to do is pick a tooth, pick any tooth you want, mark it with a Sharpie so that we can track it. We are essentially testing the furthest forward slot and the furthest backward slot to see how out of a line they are, and it's easiest to use the same tooth in case there's any kind of chipping or damage to the tooth. And what we're looking for here is to be within a couple thousandths of an inch. You can chase perfection if you want. I have at times in the past. You can get it really close, but what I would warn is that there are certainly not perfect machining techniques used on everything here. These miter slots may have a 1,000th of an inch, 2,000ths of an inch deviation from one area to the other area in terms of thickness, so your dial indicator could move a little more one way or the other. Anything under 3,000ths of an inch, I like to try to hit for 2 or less, is well beyond perfect for me. We're woodworking, we're not machinists, so tolerances are much more lax, let's say, than in aerospace parts. So let's get our baseline reading here, pick a spot on the tooth, and kind of just try to get it on the same spot of the tooth as well. All right, now you can either zero out your dial indicator or just kind of remember where it starts. I am at 3 thousandths over 0. We're going to go as far back as we can and still make contact. I am at 3.5 thousandths. Wait, got a little slippage there. I'm at about 4.5 thousandths out of 0, trying to align with the same spot. So I'm within my personal tolerance levels. I will adjust this, of course, so I can show you, but this would be totally fine with me. I'm under 3 thousandths of an inch. That's really good. That could even be as simple as some miter slot deviation or the blade deviation itself. I don't know, but this would be acceptable. But let's now talk about how we adjust this. So the way this works is this main tabletop is held down by 4 bolts in the corner, 2 on the outside here, 2 internally, and then there is a 5th pivot point bolt that allows us to move the table back and forth. It is locked into place in terms of adjusting back and forth before we tighten those by 2 Allen bolts under the back of these wings, right on the edge here of this table. What we need to do is go around and loosen the 4 bolts, and I will show you exactly where they are starting outside and going in so you can follow. Once we've done that, then we can play with the loosening or tightening of the Allen bolts. Like I said, some people adjust by cranking on it, but when you get down there and see how tight it is, I think it's a little easier to loosen them a bit, give it a love tap, check it again. We will have to come back and forth to check each time, so it can be time consuming. Be careful chasing perfection. That's all I'll say. You can spend a lot of time chasing perfection doing this. A headlamp or some kind of light in there is going to be very handy because the 2 bolts that are internal are way up and in there. And we will also need to rotate the blade to get to this one on this side. All right, let's go down to the 2 easy ones. We're going down from the front. We're going to come up here. And this in the middle here is what I call the pivot bolt. I guess it's not technically a bolt, but it's essentially a bolt-ish that goes under there. We are not looking at these 2. We are going over to the far side. So you're coming from the inside above the wheel, and then you are coming towards the outer side of the cabinet here. These are the 2 that hold the top on. These, I believe, hold the trunnion on. We are not undoing those. Now, you do not need to take these out. We just need to undo them just a tiny bit, just a little bit loose so that the table can pivot itself, and it pivots on this middle part in there. Now, I want to say ahead of time, in case you don't watch the rest, when you tighten these, go in a star pattern. Just make sure you do that. I don't know exactly what that does, but SawStop was very clear to me to tighten them in a star kind of alternating pattern. Okay, let's do the back ones now. We're going to come under here. Bear with me. This gets a bit awkward. And we are going to come in from this side panel here, and we are looking at this guy right up in here. We are not looking at this guy, we are looking at this guy right here. This is in the side cabinet, coming down, and you're coming up. Do this one before you have to tilt the blade. We can also get a look while we're in here at the mechanism of how this tightens or how it holds in place. To access the 4th bolt, lower the blade, tilt the saw somewhere close to 45 degrees, and then we're going to walk around this way. We're going to come inside, down through here. And this is essentially a mirror image of the other side. We are looking up to the left, and it is the outside bolt. This guy, not that guy. Just loosen this a little bit. We can see the other Allen bolt right here pressing on this piece of metal. So again, we're coming in from the outside of the cabinet, and we are looking up and to the left, and it is the bolt on the left. We will now position the saw back to 90 degrees or close enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, just so that we can measure the distance. We are then going to walk down here, come around. We will go back under this cabinet, and with, I believe, the number 5 Allen wrench, we are going straight up into here. This slot right here, there is an Allen bolt that we saw earlier on the inside. You have to go through this hole, and you can either loosen both of them and do a little tapping, or loosen one and just kind of use this to try to press it over. But it's such a tight space, especially on the other side, that it's almost easier just to tap. Though when you go back to tighten it, it can shift a little bit. So it's up to you. After that, we will go back around to the other side, We will come back down under here and we will be looking straight up there. There is the other hole with the bolt on the inside. We must go through there. So again, we're coming from the outside. We're going up and under into this hole right here. Obviously, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty will allow you to loosen that up so you can adjust the table. My adjustment is now essentially perfect. We are almost on the 0 line, which is good enough for me, 0, 0. Now, I just want to say again, mine was too far away in the back here, meaning that on my dial indicator, I was clockwise away from 0. To correct that, I loosened the back left and the back right, and I tapped on this corner here to pivot this way. That is what allowed me to get there and get it in line. We are now, before we touch anything else, going to go down and tighten those bolts a little bit at a time. All 4 of them in a star pattern-ish. So back right or back left, front right, front left, and go around. Do not crank all the way on one of them first. It's very easy to shift this table some. You have spent time, your back probably hurts, and you've got this exactly where you want it. So very slowly and carefully tighten those bolts. Ideally, you didn't untighten them much before, so this should be relatively simple. Check it again after you've tightened each bolt. Make sure each time a little bit tighter that it hasn't moved. It's better to correct it before you've tightened all of them and you have to go back under there. Once you have got the 4 main bolts tightened, we now go under back to the Allen wrench bolts and we screw those in tight until they are making full contact. There's no need to just ram on them. We just want them making full contact to help hold the table in position. For those who may have missed it earlier, we are simply coming under here up into this hole here where the Allen wrench is, or the Allen bolt is right there, simply righty-tighty. And again, going back under here, opening up this door, looking straight up into the back left here in this hole right here, righty-tighty. Just need those to be snug. At this point, the tabletop is aligned. We are confident that these miter slots are parallel to the blade. Now we can go ahead and make sure the fence is parallel to the miter slot. We are simply going to turn our dial indicator or combination square around, pick a spot, lock it down, and check front to back. Now, what I will say, one thing I discovered about this fence here is that these white panels are just plywood, and there are bolts, well, you got to go underneath, that hold them on there. And it is not perfectly flat along the way. There are little kind of dimples in and out, I assume from where the bolts were tightened a little too hard, perhaps. I've considered getting an aluminum extrusion to replace this, but it's perfectly fine as is, even if it bothers me. However, the point that that brings me to is that when you are using the dial indicator to slide back and forth, sometimes you can see it wave in and out. So what you've got to do is pick a spot in front as your kind of 0 spot. Anywhere kind of in this back area. I don't think you need to come all the way back here because the wood is making contact here. So somewhere in this area in between, and then somewhere in the exit area back here. And we are simply looking for this to either be perfect or, in my opinion, 1 to 2 thousandths out to the right, away from the blade. Not much more than that, just 1,000th or 2. And the idea there is that we won't get any pinching. We will always have just a little breathing room in the back, and it will not push the wood into the saw on the way back. If you have it tilted inward, you will get noticeable blade marks as it goes through and out, and your cut will not be straight. Some people do prefer to get it to perfectly flat. Because this fence, for me, has a little waviness, I always just go 1 to 2 thousandths out to the right. This is pretty straightforward. Just go ahead and do this. I will show you now how to adjust this fence, though I'm sure you did this when you were initially assembling it. I'll just run over it again. We're now going to adjust the fence. If you have made any changes to the position of this main cabinet top, you will have to readjust the fence and possibly your miter gauge because you have now shifted the miter slot. Now the way this works is pretty cool. These Biesmeyer fences have a bolt in the front on either side, which pushes on these little white pads underneath here. And this back lever pulls the fence into the rail, And then depending upon how far out these little white things are pushing, it will adjust left or right, giving us a large amount of adjustment. We also have these white threaded inserts here, which allow us to tilt the fence to 90 degrees this way, which we will do after. The first thing we're going to do is get a base measurement of where we're at. Now there are 3 ways to do this really. The first is dial indicator, which I believe is the most accurate. The second is combination square riding against the miter gauge and touching in 2 spots. And the third is just to try to eyeball line it up with the miter slot. I think that one's the hardest. You're trying to kind of feel and look over. I don't love that one, but if you don't have a dial indicator and you don't like the square method, that's kind of your ultimate simplicity one, is just to feel along there and kind of eyeball it. Let's get a baseline measurement. I like to kind of start here and then finish here. Obviously, I'm coming into contact with the wood right here. So I need to know more than anything else, this pressure point area here to this pressure point area here. I'm not as concerned all the way back here, as this is where the contact is being made initially, and I'm applying the pressure most in this area here. Now I've learned over time that instead of trying to set the dial gauge to 0 is just to kind of tilt the fence or push the fence in until it hits 0. And there we go, we're at 0. Actually, I want to be a little bit up here, and I am locked in at 0. Now I'm going to about up in this area here. We're going to go all the way through, and I'm going to bring you overhead in a second and show you the deviation in this fence itself. All right, that's actually nearly perfect, surprisingly. It's only off by about, well, 1.5 thou, which is what I moved the fence here, so that makes sense. However, due to the deviation, I've got a few spots internally here that I would consider to be too far in. So instead of 1.5 thou run out here, I'm going to just increase that about 1/2 thou to 2 thou run out, which gets me both the tilt away from the blade at the end, of just very minimal tilt away from the blade, as well as any of these kind of in spots for small pieces are not going to be going into the blade. I want you to see the deviation just in the fence itself. I'm at 0 right now. We've now moved clockwise. Now we're going all the way back left counterclockwise. We have now been to both sides of 0, and we're not even through the cutting area first. Look at that movement. And this is not going anywhere. This is locked in there. You can see that dial barely move at all when I try to twist this. So it's absolutely not the run out in the miter slot, in my opinion. And you can just sort of feel it where the bolts line up. You can feel the dips. So like I said earlier, we want either perfectly parallel or slightly away. Now, because I have deviations in the fence, I definitely angle 2 thou or so away, so that at no point a small piece of wood is going to tip in. It will always be making sure it's going slightly out. Not enough to change my cut at all, just enough for extra safety. So I'm at 0 here, and on way up here where I want to be, I am to the right of 0 by 1 thou. So I'm clockwise to 0 by 1 thou. Now I can very quickly tell that that is too far in. If I go and push, just tap the fence in, the dial indicator moves to the right, which means I need to adjust this, again, about 1.5 thou, 2 thou out to the left, which should return my fence to slightly out after adjusting this whole tabletop about 2 thou. So everything makes sense there. Now the adjustment mechanism works here, like I said, using 2 of these threaded inserts. That's what I want to push the pads. I need to move the end of my fence slightly away. So I can do that in 2 ways. I could either pull in a bunch on this one and not change this, or tighten this one a bunch and not change that one. But in reality, what we want to do is we want to get a nice balance. If you do it way too far on one side, what will happen is that when you click this into place, it will shift itself into place. But whatever you have measured using your ruler or your measuring tape will no longer be correct. We want it so that it doesn't move a ton left or right. It's just enough to correct itself without taking apart our entire measuring between there for where we want the cut to be. So for me, because I need to move this away, I need to tighten this side a little bit to shift this way, and loosen this side a little bit to shift equally that way without having it be a giant pushover. Now, I'll warn you ahead of time, especially if you're doing just the first setup or anything like that, if you are close, you only have to do the smallest of little fractional turns on this thing. you will overshoot this very quickly, and it's a lot of back and forth until you get a feel for, I mean, I'm just talking a hair or two movement. We'll change this by a couple thou, which is what we're dealing with here on mine at least. Once you've got this to a satisfactory level, we're going to leave this alone. At the end, we will do a few test cuts, and that'll really double check to make sure everything's correct. We now want to make sure this fence is 90 degrees to the table. We're going to take out the big chunky one here, and these two white threaded inserts on either side will raise and lower this. You don't want it super low. You want it off of the metal a little bit, riding on these nylon, whatever they are, inserts. We don't want it grinding along there, but you also don't want to have a gigantic gap. We want a little bit of a gap in case sawdust comes under there, and also because there is a plastic nylon part underneath this fence, which keeps it off of the cast iron so that it can slide really nicely and easily. We don't want this dragging on the backside here. Now, when I check the fence to 90 degrees, I like to do it from this section of the main cabinet table. Getting these wings perfectly level all the way across is a little tricky. Most of our cutting and our pressure on anything that's not like a wide sheet good or a wide board is coming on this main cabinet area. So I want to make sure it is square to this part 100% for sure. It really helps in this case to have a light or a flashlight, put it up against there, lock it down, and check. Wow, looks like I am actually out of square. Yeah, by a little bit there. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this. I have a gap at the bottom, so because I don't wanna lower this too much, I'm only gonna go slightly down on the right and slightly up on the left, and then I will still double check to make sure I'm not dragging it all on the table. Now, one thing you'll quickly find out if your fence is like mine and it has some dips because somebody at the factory over-tightened the bolts, you're not gonna get a perfectly dark line up all the way across. There's going to be some flashlight coming through anywhere one of those dips is. I'm looking for contact at the top and the bottom. As long as I have contact there, I know it's at 90 degrees. And any little light spots in the middle where the fence dips a little bit, doesn't matter. Those are going to be there no matter what I do. So as long as I have contact top and bottom, I'm good to go. I really like these engineer squares for this. Just permanently fixed 90 degrees. That's all they do. And they are really accurate. If I remember, I will link this one down below. It's from a company called Grows. Not super expensive, 4 inches, great for the bandsaw too. And the last thing I'll say about this is make sure to lock the fence down when you check it. It can be real easy to forget to lock it down and you're looking at it and you're like, this looks right. And then the next time you go and you lock it down, it's actually changed a little bit because it wasn't fully locked on there. So make sure you've locked it on every time you check the adjustment. Now, if you're not happy with how you originally set up the wings and maybe they're not level enough, this is a really good time to deal with that. You're already doing maintenance on all of this. Now, what SawStop recommends is that if your wing isn't nice and level front to back, that you bolt down the middle, pick one other end, bolt that down, and then if the other end is raised, you either use a clamp to try and pull it together or a dead blow mallet and then tighten it down. Now for me, my wings are pretty flat. They're not perfect, but I've never had a problem when actually making a cut, which is all I care about. This one is a little low here and a little high here. Little high here, little low here, but they're flush in the middle, which is what I want. Again, all of my cutting action comes where this blade is. So as long as this reference surface in this area is as close to flat, I can live with that. I don't care that they're slightly out. If it was really bad, I would deal with it. And if you are here and you want to deal with it and you're not happy, it's a good time to do it. So like I said, pick whatever side is high. You lock the bolt in the middle and you lock the bolt on the low side, and then either a very strong clamp or a dead blow mallet or pushing on it and then tightening it is how they recommend. You obviously need a decent sized level to get all the way across here. 36 inch works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. If you want, we can set the angle stops. Now, I personally do not try to get them perfect. I have a whole video about getting the 45 perfect, but I'm going to just quickly show you the mechanism for which you do the 90 degree and the 45 degree angle stop. This is going to be a little quicker. If you want the full tutorial on the 45 degree, go to my channel. It's on there. I don't personally trust myself at all times to get it exactly right. So I always leave a little bit of room so that I can hit the stop. I know I'm really close, and then I can get out either a square or a digital angle gauge and go from there. I have just found that it doesn't always work well when you try to set it perfectly and then you go to do some test cuts a year from later and it's, I don't know. I don't like setting it perfectly. So what we'll do is we'll get them really close. We'll check it. Hopefully we have a little wiggle room and then you're good to go from there just using the normal tilt and your angle gauge. To access the angle adjustment stops, we have to come in through the bottom here. And we are going in through the side. Now that right there is the, they call it 0 but 90-degree stop. And that up there is the 45. Now the way these work is there is a silver locking nut on the back. And then of course these yellow bolts. To make any adjustment, you have to first loosen the silver locking nut. And then they're sort of opposite of each other in that if you tighten the bolt here, this one, which is the 0/90 degree, will prevent the saw from going any further that way. If you pull it out, it will be able to slide more that way. Conversely, with the 45-degree stop, if you need to go over 45 degrees, you need to loosen the locking nut and then tighten the bolt inward, allowing the trunnion to rotate up further. And so it's a little counterintuitive. If you want to be able to go closer to 45, or past 45, I should say, this yellow bolt in the top has to go inwards more. And if you want to go past 90 degrees, this one has to come out more. And then once you are done doing that, you need to lock back down that silver nut. And what I would say is be very careful, because when you're tightening that silver nut, you can accidentally turn the yellow one a little bit. And the biggest problem with this is that every time you adjust the 45 up here, you then have to go and check it. You can't have the saw blade at 45 degrees and then alternate it. You have to pull it all the way back down, come all the way back up, check your angle gauge, all the way back down again. It's very time consuming. This is why I say I leave it a little bit further in so that I can go to 45, then come back, go past 45, then come back. And I've just never touched this one, to be honest. It was fine as is. I just leave it. But if you need to adjust it and you can't hit 90, you need to reverse this out of there a bit. If you are going too far past 90 and you want to stop it earlier, you need to tighten it a little bit. They're essentially both just running into things, running into other pieces of metal and stopping it. We just have a few little adjustments left. Now, the first of those is the riving knife. If you own the saw, you'll know that this riving knife that comes with it is meant for more of a full curve blade. I have some full curves, but mostly I use Diablo or thin curve blades, so it doesn't really fit perfectly. It hangs a bit over to the right, and the trouble comes here in the adjustment. It's very twitchy, very touchy. These two black bolts that you see right here and here are what loosen this entire silver mechanism that this knife sits in. And that allows it to pivot in and out, left and right, all over the place. Now that's fine. It gives us a ton of adjustment, but it is incredibly sensitive. And the biggest problem comes when you're going to lock it back down. This ball hex wrench that we use to change the cartridge adjustment fits perfectly in there as well and works really great. You also have to be careful not to cut yourself, because they tighten them down from the factory quite tight. And when you're cranking on this, it's very easy to cut yourself. But of course, we have to have the blade in there to check the riving knife, or else we're gonna have to take it on and off, on and off. It's a total mess. When you go to tighten it down, just unbelievably gently go back and forth between the two of them. That's my only advice. And you will eventually get it. It's just a little bit of a frustrating process. Now, of course, while we're here, we can check the cartridge and see if we're a good distance from the blade. A lot of times people forget to do this and they'll go 2 years without ever checking it. SawStop, of course, provided us with a handy little check. We can just go right down and just check it against the tooth. Can we twist? Oh yeah, we're good to go there. Now, of course, if you need to adjust, it is right here to the left of the blade. And inserting this hex ball wrench, I think what you call it, in there and turning it will go up and down with the cartridge, bringing it either closer or further. You have to have it a certain distance or within a range, as it says on there, 1/16 to 3/32. If it is too far, if it is further than that, it will not make contact well in time and it will not stop the blade as fast. It's very important that it is not too far away. So double check this. They recommend checking it every time you switch the blade out. I rarely remember to do that, but at least once a year, ideally 2 times a year, I just double check. All my blades are from Freud. All blades should be pretty darn close to the same size, and they give you an entire, 1/16 of an inch range, give or take, or 1/32 of an inch range. So you've got some wiggle room there. just make sure you've got this set correctly at least once a year. Now the final thing we need to do is come in here and just check our belts, plural, and make sure everything looks healthy. We don't want any fraying, we don't want any cracking. We want these to be nice and taut, but not too much. That is the correct tension there. We only get, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch movement on either side. Putting these on and off and changing them is a whole different video. If I ever get the time that I need to change one, I will film that, but it is a bit of a pain. One of these, or maybe both of them, were changed 2 years ago. I forget. It was a real pain. I did not enjoy it at all. So if there's anything wrong with them, though, you absolutely should change them out because it is bad for the saw if one of them snaps mid-use. Now the only thing left for us to do is clean this top off, get some fresh wax on there, and we'll be good to go. In terms of maintenance, I reapply wax every month. This is an outdoor shop here. There's no climate control. I live in the Midwest, so very moist, hot, humid summers. I don't take any chances. Now, all my recommendation is here is that whatever cleaner you use to remove the old wax, if it is water-based, you do not leave it on there. I hurt my beautiful top very early on by spraying some Simple Green on there. And normally, I'd done it for a couple months at that point, and normally I'd spray, and within 25-30 seconds, I'd wipe it off. I then got a cast iron benchtop bandsaw. So I then started spraying it on here, spraying it on there, and then coming back and doing a rotation. I left it on too long and it left just, it's not rust, it's just some kind of weird brownish squiggle marks after I'd sprayed it everywhere. And it hurt at the time. It hurt a lot. It was such a nice shiny bench top. But this has a million scratches on it now, so I don't worry as much, but I use mineral spirits now. And while I definitely don't let them just sit on there for a while, I really like this because it cleans up grease, sap, any kind of resin from the trees really quickly, really easily. I can just wipe it on, give it a good brush, wipe it down, and then I take some compressed air and just finish the rest of it off. Clean the whole thing in a minute and a half with how quickly it evaporates. I've now started using bowling alley wax. I talk about this in a different video about paste wax. This just is a form of paste wax. I like this better than the min wax I was using, and I ran out of my Johnson's. So that's all I do here. Clean it down, wait a few minutes, make sure everything's dry after I compress and wipe off. Then I apply this depending upon what time of the year it is. If it's in the winter, I only leave this on for 3 minutes or so until it gets cloudy. It often, when it's dry in the winter, it clouds up and hardens pretty quick, and I get it off of there. You do not want to leave this on there too long. It will get hard to come off if you've put this on here and you come back a half an hour later. It gets a little hard to buff off. So make sure you take it off within 5 minutes or less and you should be good to go. Now I'm gonna get to this. Please, if I left anything out that you do, and it's quite possible I did, please let me know in the comments. This is just what I do. I'm sure I missed something, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right, thanks for joining me, and hopefully you can keep your saw in tip-top condition. Bye.